Benjamin Hardy, Michael Merenda, welcome to our geoengineering age.
Thanks for having us, Dr. Rob.
Nice to see you.
It's really good to see you. And here we are, gentlemen, on the cusp of a new year, 2025. And
That's right.
I always appreciate talking with you both. And let's just get right into it. Terrain theory. Terrain theory. What is terrain theory? And how did you both come to create this magnificent presence on the internet known as terraintheory.net? All of you listening and viewing, www.terraintheory.net. Let's start with terrain theory.
I'll jump in first, Michael, and I will say I don't know. And that is why we have this project. What is terrain theory? I think we're still trying to figure this out. We're 3 years into this project, this journey, the health odyssey, as Michael calls it. And I am not going to claim to know the definitive answer. Some in this space, this terrain space, wouldn't even call it a theory. They would call it a terrain paradigm. Others call it a terrain model. We use terrain theory because when I first got exposed to the concept, that's what I saw. Terrain theory, that was the phrase that I saw. And it's a useful opposite to germ theory, which is an idea and a notion that I'd say most people are familiar with. What is terrain theory? It's this idea that illness is not determined by our exposure to germs, pathogens, but rather illness is determined by the state of our terrain, our milieu, which again, when we first started, I would have said was our body, the inner terrain. Now, having done this, having been down this rabbit hole for 3 years, I would say is now beyond just the body or the physical, but body, mind, spirit, all of those things. And the underlying idea is that your body, just like nature, as above, so below, as within, so without, your body is constantly trying to achieve balance or homeostasis. And it's doing that as it's being subjected to perhaps poor nutrition, lack of nutrition, exposure to environmental toxins, emotional stressors, non-native EMF. Throughout all of those things, your body is trying to achieve homeostasis and balance. And sometimes the way that it has to do that is create symptoms that look a lot like a cold or perhaps a flu or perhaps pneumonia. These are all methods, these are all ways or strategies that the body has in its infinite intelligence to achieve balance and homeostasis. And the germ theory approach would argue that that sickness or that illness or disease is coming from some sort of pathogen that perhaps you contracted from someone else who is showing those same or identical symptoms. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I suppose it begins to scratch the surface. And before I continue, I'm going to turn it over to Michael and see what he has for an answer. What is terrain theory, Michael?
Thanks,
I
Ben.
thought that was pretty succinct, Benjamin. You've gotten pretty good at this. Um, we often use the term prismatic health, like Ben said, mind, body, spirit. Beyond the physical, we're often we find ourselves taking inventory of maybe the stressors or toxins that we come up against in daily life, which is what brings us, I think, onto a conversation about geoengineering, because it would seem that some of these toxins, for lack of a better term, are maybe raining down from the sky, and we want to take inventory of those. But I think where it actually gets pretty interesting, as Ben alluded to, that it's not just the physical toxins, because we don't live in just a physical reality. I think there's the mental, emotional plane, the spiritual plane. So you get into some sort of esoteric and occulted spaces when inventorying what does and doesn't make you ill. I find that part of it really, really fascinating.
Michael, you just used a prismatic.
Prismatic, yep, yep.
Prism.
A prism. It was a term that a guest, Nicholas Keene, dropped on us. He's on the path of learning how to pour ayahuasca for ceremony. So he's been to Peru. He's been to the jungle many, many times, and he's confronted many demons of his own in his healing journey using plant medicine. And he dropped the term saying it's, we talk about mind, body, spirit, emotional health, spiritual health, physical health, but it's through his experience with plant medicine, he arrived at a place that it's not three separate things. It's all one thing. And he used that term prismatic health.
And I just listened to your most recent episode with Nicholas Keene over Thanksgiving. I was traveling in the deserts of Utah, and it seemed appropriate. Um,
Right.
not only is he learning how to pour, he's a beautiful songwriter and musician as well.
A
Mm.
beautiful man too. I mean, his life is really dedicated to service, I would say, literally in a service industry, which is running a restaurant and bar. But also, he bends over backwards to provide live music for his community, keep it accessible, and to treat musicians really, really well. So I'm really indebted to Nick and all he's done for me over the years, just to put a roof over our head, a meal in our tummy, and a stage with lights and sound to perform on. It's no small thing.
And we should give him a shout out. What's the name of his venue? It's in Massachusetts, right?
It's the Egremont Barn. That's right. It's right on the Massachusetts-New York border, just outside of Great Barrington, Massachusetts. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to see live music. It's a small barn, holds maybe 80, 85 people. Great food, really fun bar, but they really pride themselves on excellent music, mostly music, some comedy occasionally, and some other cabaret type of events, but mostly a music venue. One of our favorites.
Yeah. So it was Nicholas Keene who gave us this term prismatic health. Really, maybe another word for that is holistic, I suppose. But thinking about humans in flow as minds and bodies and souls and spirits who are in deep flow with the rest of living and breathing creation. 20,000 breaths a day, I like to say. Uh,
Hmm.
or as James Nestor says in his beautiful book, Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, respiration is reciprocation. So
Mm.
health, wellness, illness, disease bring us back to how optimized are we as individuals in moving through this sea, this ocean? How optimized are we, mind, body, and spirit, soul? And if we're not as heavily or as highly optimized as we could be, back to Benjamin's point about germs versus terrain, our body, mind, spirit lets us know.
It lets us know, but if we have existed in this world and never been educated on the other aspects of the prismatic health, just take the energetic or emotional, then our body might be trying to send us a message, but we don't know how to read. We don't know how to read it. We don't know how to speak that language. We don't understand what it's trying to tell us. And that conversation with Nick is a good one to linger on just for a second here, because his work with ayahuasca, Madre ayahuasca, which is a plant medicine, traditional Amazonian plant medicine. The what's going on down there in these ceremonies, the healing that is happening, modern science, allopathic medicine does not understand. It cannot explain it. Does not have the language, or even I would say the open mind to be able to explain what is going on down there. And there's some incredible examples of healing that has happened that the listener can read about in the book Fellowship of the River that Nick turned us on to. And that was written by a guy who was, let's call it, classically trained doctor who became attracted to plant medicine and ended up going down to spending a lot of time in Peru and opening up a center down there, a healing center, specifically using ayahuasca and some of the other master plant medicines. And this author chronicles some of the folks who come down to that that center and some of the ailments that they brought with them, some of the chronic illnesses that they brought with them. And these people are being healed of chronic illness, doing nothing more than taking ayahuasca, than doing perhaps a week or 2 weeks of ceremony every night. And some of the interactions between those who pour and are singing, the ones who are holding the ceremony, and those who are there participating in it, defy any sort of explanation that we have. So there's a woman who goes down with, she's had migraines, chronic migraines, debilitating migraines for much of her life. And there's no answer in modern medicine. Pharmaceuticals do not provide her any sort of easement or cure. And she goes down with these chronic migraines and sits in ceremony. And the author at this point has become not a master pourer, not a shaman, but someone who can help facilitate. And part of that experience is to sit with the person, with the tourists, the pasajeros, who've come down there to sit in this ceremony. You sit across from them, and while you're both experiencing ayahuasca, the Icaro will sing to the person who's down there to experience ayahuasca, to sit with the medicine. And in this instance, this specific instance, this woman who is experiencing chronic migraine, the author, while in ceremony, when they both have ayahuasca in them, sees a dark cloud that's hovering. You have visions. This is part of the medicine. Sees a dark cloud just basically obscuring this woman's head. And he sings to this dark cloud. And that dark cloud starts to lift and lift and lift and lift and lift until finally it's gone. And the next day, when they both come out of ceremony, part of the integration is to then go back to this individual and say, hey, how did it all go? What did you experience? What happened to you while you were in the ceremony? And this woman says, well, it was interesting. When you came over and sat with me and started to sing to me, I had a vision of a dark cloud over my head. And then you started to sing to me, and that dark cloud lifted. So they both had a shared vision. And she said, when that dark cloud lifted, my migraine has vanished. It disappeared. And over the course of multiple ceremonies while she was down there, essentially cured herself of the migraine. And what ends up happening in these ceremonies often is that the individual will remember or recall or be exposed to memories that they may have suppressed, childhood trauma. A lot of that can be like sexual, uh, harassment or assault or some sort of like sexual trauma that they may have suppressed. And in facing that trauma and then essentially like integrating that trauma, accepting the trauma, integrating that trauma, forgiving themselves and the person who may have done that to them, they heal themselves of that chronic illness. Now, they're not using any sort of pharmaceutical. They're not doing any sort of talk therapy. There's no lifestyle change. They simply sit with a plant medicine and then they are cured of chronic illness. That allopathic medicine does not have an explanation for that. They simply do not. And so this is just one aspect of what we might call terrain, this spiritual, emotional trauma that gets addressed through a plant medicine that's here on the planet, nature. And then one can move forward and restore themselves, restore their health, move on, and then continue to grow and thrive as a human being.
Wow, what a beautiful story, Benjamin. Well, let's back out and talk about terrain theory, the community that you've created, you both. I've been an avid listener and occasional viewer of terrain theory. I don't think I've missed an episode. And I think there are many, many humans out there just like me who are so appreciative of what you both are doing to hold this space in community with terraintheory.net. How did this come to be, this terrain theory community, and how many guests have you had so far?
Oh God, we're up over 150 episodes, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're up there.
yeah.
How did it come to be? So when COVID hit, COVID has become the catalyst for many a great project and many a great let's say awakening. When COVID hit, I because I have a son, an 8-year old, and he was what 5, 4 at the time. I was already, I won't say hip, but somewhat aware of um, the dangers of some of the interventions that allopathic medicine pediatricians would, impose upon your child, let's say. And when COVID hit, and immediately the talk was, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing you can do. Stay inside until we have a vaccine. There's nothing you can do. Stay inside unless you get so sick that you have to go to the hospital. And that immediately was a red flag for me. It was immediately a red flag. You felt disempowered, and the message was we just once we get a vaccine, everyone's going to be safe, and this thing became global. And so I knew right away which direction I wasn't going to go. And I didn't like the idea, one, of being locked down. I had a visceral reaction to lockdowns, mask mandates, and all the rest. So immediately I just was like, I'm against this. Whatever this is, I'm against it. And in that time, you start hearing these voices who were maybe aligned. And the phrase terrain theory, I kept seeing on social media. And the meme, the one that kept popping up was the fish in the fishbowl. It was vaccinate the fish or clean the water, right? Germ theory is vaccinate the fish. Terrain theory was clean the fishbowl, clean the water, clean the environment that the fish is in. And I was like, oh, terrain theory, that's interesting. What's that all about? Because I don't like the other option. I don't like the germ theory. I already know I'm against that. What is this clean the fishbowl idea? And you do a search on Google and terrain theory would come up, but a lot of the search results were like it's pseudoscience, it's been disproven. Um, and I'd already at that point too developed a healthy mistrust of Google and its search results. So you start doing a little digger deeping. You start to find these voices who are talking about it. You discover that there's a documentary already that's come out, Terrain the film, the viral delusion. There are some books that have already been written. Dr. Tom Cowan's been speaking about this a little bit, and then boom, you're down the rabbit hole. And at that time, let's see, when COVID first started, the lockdowns and so on, Mike and I started to get back in touch a little bit more because as a musician, he wasn't able to tour. And the conversation was like, hey, like this doesn't feel good. The masks mandates and the vaccine mandates, it doesn't feel good. What do you think, Mikey? And then we started chatting and we started sharing podcasts and voices. And at one point I just said, look, there's nothing out there on terrain theory. We got to do a podcast. Like, let's go. Let's own this phrase for good and just start doing an exploration, have a web presence so that Google, we're just sort of sticking up the middle finger to Google. Like you can't, this isn't pseudoscience. This is something that we really need to get to the heart of. And so, yeah, we started a podcast, started a website, and like, I guess from my perspective, the rest is history. Mike, please jump in.
Yeah, I believe my impression is that you really spearheaded this enterprise, but in your Google searching, you were finding all these threads and strands and shards and voices, but you really wanted to find a way to get it all under one roof, one umbrella. And I really think that was kind of your mission. Can we just organize some of these dissident voices in one place? Because like you were the information just seems so scattered around the internet, and like you said, derided as pseudoscience and all this, but it was really resonating with you. I was, like Ben mentioned, I've been a touring musician for 25 years, but all of a sudden I had time on my hands, and honestly, at first I kind of welcomed it. I didn't know what was going on. I mean, we were one of those families. My kids got many of those New York State childhood scheduled vaccines because I didn't know any better. So we were just kind of going along to get it. I was even one of those people like washing our groceries when we got home from the grocery store early on because we just kind of believed the hype. We were doing what we were told. But Ben was ringing the bell saying there's something's not right here. And like I said, I had the time and the bandwidth to really dive in, to listen to the videos he was sending along, to read the articles, to read the books. And as many people have found, it's been really one of the greatest blessings in my life because as someone like yourself, Rob, who has a life in environmentalism, that was something that I fancied myself. They say in activism, you're supposed to sort of pick your lane and drive it home, stay in it. And I had really picked environmentalism as a songwriter, but coming up in the folk music scene, which is very embedded in left-wing politics, which really used to stand for free speech and environmentalism, and I would argue organic ways of living versus synthetic. I was really passionate about a clean environment. And so this conversation around terrain theory, where, as I mentioned early on, taking inventory of toxins really resonated with me as an environmentalist. It just seemed like the next logical step. Can we really have a hard conversation about what's poisoning us? and we just kept pulling on that thread, and all of a sudden, um, many emperors had no clothes, as we discovered. The more thread we pulled, so it's been the ride of a lifetime. I do credit Ben for having the vision to kind of build an edifice for us to explore. We're also very close friends. We grew up together in New Hampshire, but as you get older, it's hard to stay tight with all your besties from back in the day, but this project has really brought us back together in a beautiful way. They say if you want to spend time with your friends as an adult, you best work together, and that's really proved to be true. I mean, I'm blessed that my wife is in my band, so I get to have another best friend that I work with. It keeps the collaborative spirit and the intellectual curiosity sort of alive and burning. But it's been a really beautiful blessing for my life to work with Ben in this way on a weekly basis, on side chats, text threads, phone calls between episodes. As I often say, we've had to redo our entire education in the last 4 years, and I wouldn't have it any other way. A couple of things I've noticed on this journey is that one of all the causes I've taken up, being anti-war activist, like I mentioned, environmentalist, this taking on health is the most controversial topic out there, I would argue. And we can get into why that may be, but I have found that it's so personal for each individual person. Everybody has a story, as they should. All life is stories. But when you start to disrupt someone's belief system about something as simple as what they eat or where they live or how they live, and this comes down to lifestyle. This is the underpinnings of why the whole quote unquote AIDS era was so controversial, because now you're talking about someone's lifestyle. You're criticizing someone's lifestyle. And really that plays right into wokeism. And it's what I've found is the things that you're not allowed to talk about, the third rail topics, are exactly where the corruption seeps in the deepest, the things that are off limits. So I think because we have each other's backs as best friends, we together have the courage to go places that I don't think we would go as individuals, and we're better for it. I mean, I'm in the best health of my life. I'm 48 now, and I've never felt better. And every day, not only do I feel great, but intellectually, I just can't wait to find out what the next discovery is going to be. And it's really the podcast that presents those breadcrumbs that we follow one after the next, and they never seem to run out.
So I think I probably speak for many terrain theory community members when I say that one of the most beautiful things about this 3 year, 150 episode ish adventure you're both on is the affection, the love for each other, the friendship, the camaraderie that you both share. It's very moving. And I think for a lot of people out there who feel alone, you're both modeling, I think, how to be a mature adult man. Husbands, fathers, citizens. I'm not going to use the word activist, but maybe engaged, curious humans. So just a moment to say thank you to you both. I so appreciate that. And you were anticipating my next question, Michael, before we pivot perhaps to geoengineering. Revelations. What have been some significant revelations you've both had on this terrain theory journey? And Michael, what you just said would be my answer as a listener. Health is so controversial, which is so odd.
It is odd.
But maybe, Michael, you put your finger on it because it's so personal. Maybe that explains when you poke at that bear, or many bears, why they growl back. So yeah, I'm curious. And Benjamin, like if you were to answer that question, like couple of big revelations for you, and feel free to piggyback on what Mike said.
when when we first started and it was terrain theory versus germ theory, I would say for the first 6 months, maybe, my feeling was it's this balance between the two. That, of course, there, we're gonna have. I was on the Zach Bush train. There's 10 to the 30 viruses that are circulating in the air, and they hitch a ride on PM 2.5, and that's how they travel the Earth. And uh, but if you just take care of your body, if you eat well and you get sun and you ground and you sweat and you do cold, all that, you're fine. You can be exposed to all these things, and your terrain is healthy, is immaculate, and so therefore you are not going to get sick. Why is it that you've got a family and two of the members get sick and then that third one just doesn't, you're around it, that third person doesn't get sick? Well, it's because that person knows how to take care of themselves and their terrain is stronger. That's where I was for the first third of this terrain theory journey. And then this no virus position, the exploration into the quote unquote evidence as to the existence of pathogenic viruses, that opened my eyes. And that's the biggest revelation, that pathogenic viruses have never been proven to exist. It is wrong, it is incorrect to say viruses don't exist because you can't prove something doesn't exist. But the evidence that's been provided is insufficient. Viruses have never been proven to exist. And that is maybe one of the most controversial things you could ever drop in a conversation on someone who has no idea that this is even what terrain means when you go as deep as you possibly can. But that's, for me, that was the biggest revelation. And that, in turn, one, it took me a while. It took me a long time and a lot of repetition and a lot of examining um, to rewrite that story in my head, because we are brought up from day zero believing in the existence of pathogenic viruses and that you will get sick if someone else is coughing in the elevator, and you need to have vaccinations. You need to get your flu shot every year or you will get the flu. You Bernstein Bears books. Sister gets a cold, then brother gets the cold, then mama gets the cold. It's all right there from a very young age up into your adult years. And trying to rewrite that narrative takes effort and took effort. And the other side of that for me was a real sense of agency and a removal of that blanket of fear that I've been living under my entire life, that I better not get too close to that person in the store who's hacking. Now, I mean, my son who's here home from school going through an upgrade has a little croupy cough and he's sniffling. I'm right next to him in bed. Now, this kid is coughing in my face. I have zero fear whatsoever that I'm going to come down with whatever he has because of this no virus position. I'm convinced, based on what I've seen, based on the evidence, I'm convinced that that's where we're at. Now, maybe somewhere down the road, science has a better way of getting to the heart of it. And maybe there will be evidence down the road that points to more definitively the existence of a pathogenic virus, but it does not exist. Not right now. So that's my biggest revelation.
And let me just piggyback there for a moment. Anybody who's listening or watching this who's scratching their heads going, wait a minute, germ theory isn't real. You've done, both of you, such good work in having the Dr. Andrew Kaufmans, the Dr. Tom Cowans, the Dr. Samantha and Mark Baileys, the many, many guests that you've had on terrain theory who've explored this question of germ theory from so many different vantage points and will continue to. And so, again, a shout out to you. And isn't it funny that in the same sentence, people will use the phrase germ theory and then be so convinced that the theory is actually manifesting?
Well, folks, again, in this terrain space won't even call it a germ theory anymore. They say it's a germ hypothesis. That's as far as it got, and it's essentially failed to prove itself, failed to provide any evidence.
Yeah.
So that's mine. I don't know, Michael.
Yeah,
What do you
Well,
Michael.
think?
just to piggyback on what Ben said, because I know this is a real head scratcher, and it's It's very difficult to have this conversation with someone who's just coming at it for the first time. But I'm with Ben. I've got a couple kids too, and my daughter's had a cough for the better part of a month, and I have no real concerns that I know for a fact I'm not going to catch a particle that is somehow emanating from her because it's been proven that that doesn't exist. The example I like to use is we are blaming the scab for the work of the knife. We're not saying that there's no scab. You get cut, it scabs over, but the scab did not cause you to become injured. The scab is the healing response. When they do virus isolation procedures, what they call the gold standard of virology, to isolate the particle that they're pinning all the blame on as the pathogenic agent. Really, what they're doing is poisoning a cell lining with antibiotics, antifungals, and it's causing the cytopathic effect to take place. We're not even to say nothing of the fact that this is just some random flesh in a petri dish. This is not a living system. This is not Rob. This is not Mike. This is not Ben. It's really abstracted. This is just some cell lining in a petri dish that we're adding a cocktail of poisons to. And what do you expect is going to happen? It's going to break down. And as it breaks down, people point to these particles under their microscope and say, there it is. That's the virus. Well, what I say is it's disintegration. It's what you see under a microscope when something falls apart. So they've basically discredited the isolation procedure in virology, which renders the entire field basically obsolete. But there is something to be said for resonance and coherence. And this is where we get into the energetics of health and beyond the physical plane, like we talked about early on. If there's a common toxin in my house, which there are many in all of our houses, we just had an addition put on before I had any of this terrain education. There's this toxic spray foam in my attic and behind all the walls. Like, I know that's not good. It's gonna get in me. It's gonna get in my kids and my wife and my family. It's gonna get in us, and we're gonna have to get it out. And like Ben mentioned, how do you get it out? Through the sniffles, through a fever, through the flu. That's how the toxins get out. And if one of my family is expressing an upgrade, as we like to call it, they may send an energetic frequency. That's the thing that's emanating from them. And if I need to experience a similar upgrade, I'm going to catch that coherence. And it's not because it's bringing me down, it's because it's bringing me up. It's instigating a coherent upgrade. And that's how we've reframed becoming ill. It's always in your service. The body does not make mistakes. Now, again, this is where it gets very personal. I am very active. I play ice hockey several times a week. I get up early. I go through a whole stretching routine where I'm massaging my lymphatic system. I do at least 20 minutes of like mindful meditation. Like, I'm a grown man and I have the discipline to do these things. And as a result, we're our own experiments, right? I tend to, knock on wood, no one likes being sick. I tend to not get ill very often, even when my whole household is ill around me, because I've developed the habit stacking, as we like to call it, to keep my body in what as optimal shape as I can muster as a 48-year-old man. To me, that's getting my shoes off and getting on my feet on the ground. Much harder to do in the middle of winter in the Northeast, but doable. I just put a grounding mat on my bed. I have my house filled with orgone devices to try to create coherent fields. And then that manifests in funny little, does that stuff really work? Well, the food in my fridge seems to last twice as long as the food in other people's fridges. The one that I put under my plant, that plant in the last 2 months is doubled in size, right? So that's what I mean about following the breadcrumbs. There's so many things to try, but what Ben and I are always preaching are the free and simple ones. And I think to answer your question, health is simple ultimately. The culture we live in is complicated, but health is ultimately rather simple. Ground your body on Mother Earth with your bare skin, get your bare skin in the sun, Again, not the easiest thing to do in the middle of winter in the Northeast. Find the cleanest food available to you, as close to the source as it was grown as possible. Make sure your water doesn't have chlorine and fluoride and any toxins in it. Um, findaspring.com is a resource available to everybody. Find clean spring water bubbling up from the earth. It's hundreds and thousands of springs all around us. If you can take care of the basics in the physical realm, all of a sudden you're inspired to have a more active life of the mind and a life of the spirit. And that's again why Nick says it's just one thing. As you start to clean up your terrain, I would argue that your consciousness expands exponentially. And that's, I think, why it's so fun, because being raised in a material culture in more of an atheistic mindset, that for the second half of my life, now I know how much more there is to explore, and that I will never actually solve the mystery. But uh, that's what I'm so ecstatic about, is that the pursuit of the mystery is what makes life so fun. And it all started with cleaning up my terrain.
Beautifully said, Michael. Well, if we can shift to geoengineering for a few minutes. Here at our geoengineering age, we say that our mission is to provide for a global audience what we call an evidence-based exploration of our realm, our Earth's most pressing yet underreported global environmental issue, which is, of course, weather and climate modification. What is politely called now in the public realm, took a while, but it's called geoengineering. And you both know geoengineering seems to go by many names. The more conspiratorial term we don't use, but is the word chemtrails, but that's just a piece, trails, of a much larger puzzle. Solar radiation management, cloud whitening, brightening, sun dimming, et cetera, et cetera. How did you both come to an understanding, let's say, of this phenomenon of weather and climate modification of geoengineering, which, as 10,000 pages of public documents demonstrate, has been underway for almost 100 years now in the United States, since the 1940s?
Mike, you want to go first?
Sure. Like I said, as you're taking inventory of what you're up against.
Hmm.
Um, when I was young, there weren't stripes in the sky, as far as I can remember. If there were, I wasn't cognizant of them, but there certainly weren't as many as there are as an adult. And I think once you start peeking into these rabbit holes, there's just more and more voices raising these flags, and so you pay attention to them. Um, I know that he's kind of a controversial figure, but Dane Winnington is one of the more high profile voices out there. He certainly made the podcast rounds, and certainly raised that flag of warning and some alarm bells. The criticism with him seems to be that he doesn't seem very solution oriented, more just like kind of reactionary. I don't want to really get into that squabble, but he was a loud voice on the podcast scene that I was paying attention to, some of the sources that I trust. And Rob, you can educate us on this, because there's so many differing opinions as to what is in these trails, and it does crack me up that we're still on this whole like sun dimming solar radiation management narrative, when to me, as if we're cooling the planet, as if we're literally bouncing. That's the argument, right? We're bouncing sunlight off aluminum particles back into quote unquote space. That's how you would explain the science to a kindergartner. That's what they're attempting to do. When in reality, they're trapping heat on Earth. It's everything is inverted. And I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out exactly how this technology is being deployed. It seems impossibly obvious that the exact opposite result is 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 happening in the wake of this program. And at this point, I know it's conspiratorial, but when uh, you know, 100-year floods roll through North Carolina, and it's not just a couple extra inches of rain, it's a couple extra feet. When Lahaina is destroyed in the blink of an eye, uh, in just a couple recent examples, I'm done playing the game of thinking that this is somehow related to a climate change narrative. There may be explanations for the Earth going through um, a process of renewal and change, but to divorce the lines in the sky from catastrophic weather events at this point with the education I've been pursuing the last few years is just irresponsible and ignorant, in my opinion. Now, I don't, I haven't steeped myself in it the way you have, Rob, in terms of the ingredients and the technology. I've listened to you talk about it several times. I don't always feel equipped to back up that claim, but my intuition tells me that there are much larger players in the game that we're not told about, and there's something very nefarious being rolled out across a global scale.
Before we go to Ben, Mike, was there a moment that you can remember when you're like, okay, geoengineering is happening? I'm convinced.
I mean, it happens every day,
Hmm.
you know, in terms of there's a bunch of lines in the sky and then there's a torrential rain the next day. You start to connect these dots. I mean, I know where you live in Vermont, Rob, there's been horrible flooding. And I pay attention to the OGA socials. You guys are very good about pointing out what I'm sort of in a ham-fisted way trying to articulate. Lines in the sky the next week, followed by torrential downpours. Um, as Ben often says, sometimes the dots are so close they're hard to connect because they're on top of each other, and you can't actually notice that there's two dots.
The
So
line has
once
already
you
been made. I like that. Yeah.
yeah, once you start seeing through this lens, not that I'm going around with my not that the lens is the conspiracy theorist lens, but once you are trying to discern fact from fiction, organic from synthetic, the synthetic just pops out at you in blinding fashion. So, was there a moment? It's just a daily and weekly observation of something that I would consider synthetic being passed off as either not there, that's the gaslighting. That would be option A. Option B is it solar radiation management. We're doing this for your own good because of you bad little humans and all of your farting and burping and driving and air travel. Or the obvious one to me is that there's a much larger agenda at play, Agenda 2030, World Economic Forum, weaponizing our compassion against us via sustainable development goals, which is all very well documented. Once you start to see the bigger picture, the pieces really fall into place without too much effort.
Yeah, and on your note about where we live, so Washington County here in Vermont, where I am, is now the second most flooded slash fragile natural flooded disaster county in the United States. I don't know. I don't know where the first one is, but I should know. But so this, researching geoengineering and making this information public is it's personal
Yeah.
for us here at OGA, our three team members who are based here in Vermont, because we're living it. Just as a side, Benjamin, how about you? Was there? How did you come to this?
It's a great question. I'm not certain I have an exact moment, but there are some moments that stand out. And I think, like Michael, I wouldn't have called myself necessarily an environmentalist, but prior to COVID, I certainly was on board that climate change. I was subscribed, I would say, to that climate change narrative. And something happened something happened really during COVID. As I said, I was already kind of hip to this conversation around personal health and my child's health, and having to take that stance became comfortable being in the minority, and I also became very comfortable taking a stance that was not popular. It was not popular with the people around me, even family members. Um, the climate change one. This is going to sound unrelated, but it's very related. In June of 2020, so this is after COVID. June of 2020. I don't know if you remember Blackout Tuesday,
I do.
when everyone on social media posted a black image, and this was meant to protest police brutality. I remember what's that?
George Floyd.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, yes, and yeah. So the overall like supporting George Floyd and protesting police brutality, and I remember seeing those first posts, and immediately doing the same thing. I was like, I see all my friends doing this. I see all these people who I follow and care about. Oh my God, like I got to do this. And I did it. And credit to her, my wife at the time said, what are you doing? Why are you posting that? And I was like, well, it's, got to support it's Blackout Tuesday. We got to get on board. And she was the one who's like, you're not thinking critically. Like you're just following along. You're following what everyone else is doing. And I realized in that moment, it was a real aha moment. I quickly took the post down and I was like, you're right. I did that without actually critically thinking through any of the details. I swallowed the story, whether it's true or not. I didn't take the time to really explore and wonder why, because I think a lot of what happens, we get distracted. I think there are efforts to distract us through mainstream media, some of these like social media movements. It's an effort to distract us from something else that's going on. And I was distracted and I went along with the crowd. And in that moment, I was like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to just go along with what everyone else is doing. And so that that moment coupled with COVID, realizing I'm going to be in the minority again here because I'm not going to wear a mask. I don't believe in wearing a mask, and I'm not going to take this vaccine that they're trying to mandate. It allowed me to open my mind to everything, to all of it, and go, okay, what else? What else am I missing? I can't trust what's being told now by the mainstream media because I'm on the other side of it. I'm in opposition. So what else are they telling me that I should believe in, that I should really be thinking critically about? And climate change was one of them. And of course, you start these folks who are in the terrain space are also starting to look at everything else as well. And chemtrails, geoengineering was one of them. And I remember seeing the article on Bill Gates with a plan to dim the sun. And I'm not sure exactly when that first article emerged or when he had that first plan, but because at that point I was already associating Bill Gates with one of the leading voices who was saying stay inside until we get a vaccine, I was like, okay, I don't trust him here. I absolutely do not trust the way that he approaches health. I really got to look into this as well. What's actually going on here? Well, it seems like they have the ability to control the weather and dim the sun. He wouldn't be proposing it if this didn't exist. This science didn't exist. And then so immediately, very quickly the dots start to become connected, and you're looking up at the trails in the sky, which is the evidence right before your eyes, and you go, okay, yeah, this isn't right. They're blaming humans, cows farting, automobiles for the warming of the earth, and here it is, something's happening right before us. They're admitting that they can do it, and then boom, everything's right back on everything's on the table. So I think that article with Bill Gates, that moment with Blackout Tuesday, when I realized that I can no longer just go along with what everyone else is doing. I really need to take time, sit with, and think critically on some of these topics, these topics that 99% of, science agrees with. And so here I am, now it feels like, well, it doesn't feel like it's very clear that geoengineering is a real thing, a very real thing. There are some of the details that I'm still not sure of what is what. If I look up in the sky, what is just a contrail? What is a quote unquote chemtrail? I know we're not supposed to use that phrase. What else is happening? How much is anything? Can any of this climate change be attributed to human activity? Is it, like Michael said, just a natural sort of cycle that we're going through? And then also on top of that, man-made, like actually geoengineering, man-made climate change. So that's, yeah, that's where I'm at. And I think through the lens of like terrain and terrain theory, one of the things, so I've sort of come full circle. I was at a point where I would point up in the sky, I would take a video, I might send it to Mike, you know, "Here, they're really spraying us again," kind of thing. And I'm aware of it now, but I'm no longer going to obsess over it. I'm going to take care of myself as best I can. I'm going to continue to stay empowered and believe that I have agency over this right here. And I can't shoot that plane down. And there's only so much I can do. I will raise awareness, but I'm not going to do it with the voice of fear. I'm not going to be like Dane and ring the bell of fear all the time. I'm going to support folks like you, Dr. Rob, and your organization and point people to it and say this is evidence based. So at least first we need to just raise widespread awareness. So it's no longer a conspiracy theory that this is just fact. Okay, then now what do we do with it? And then also at the same time, what can we do here with our bodies and our minds to make sure that whatever we're exposed to, we are as equipped to handle it as we possibly can be.
Beautifully said, Benjamin. And to your point about supporting us, I have to credit you both because other than a few local radio shows, we were having no luck getting our peer reviewed science and environmental history of geoengineering in front of a larger audience until you invited us on to terrain theory to talk about geoengineering. And so that was a real breakthrough. So, again, thank you for that. And we, of course, are hoping to do lots more of that in the years to come. And to your point, Benjamin, about operating from a place of courage and love rather than fear is important. I was remembering when the three of us talked about geoengineering and you asked, I think it was you, Ben, what do we do? And I'm like, nasal breathe.
Nasal breathe. Yeah. Yeah.
And
At,
like, that's not very satisfying answer, Rob.
but you know what? At that time, Rob, I was much more outraged.
Yeah.
And that conversation really helped calm me down and go, okay, that is actually maybe the greatest thing we can do. Just breathe,
Yeah.
breathe nasally. Yeah.
I think Ben and I both learned that from you, Rob. You sort of got us to calm down. I mean, even just 10 minutes ago when I was on my last tirade, I do get worked up about it because as Ben and I have spent the last 3 years borderline obsessing over the things we can do to keep ourselves and our families the most well, there are many things that are in our control. And that's an empowering message. That's agency that Ben was talking about. The things that are in your control, control them. Control this, Rasta. All right. But that does seem to be out of our control because it's up in the sky. It's airplanes up in the sky, raining down a mystery sauce of chemicals on us, as it would seem. And it is infuriating. But to be infuriated doesn't help your terrain either. To find a way to take the high road to control what you can control. Like you said, nasal breathe. If they're going to add heavy metals to my diet against my, consent, find a way to displace them. Maybe supplement with shilajit, mineral salts, get the good stuff out. Your body is smart enough to know that when the good stuff is present, the bad stuff must be expelled. And so again, if you're always it feels like you're always being kind of batted down, it's more work to build yourself back up. And as I argued earlier, up is the only option available, and the higher you get, the better light, the more mysteries are revealed. And so it slows us down, and that's what's frustrating. I've always been a bit impetuous in nature. So there's the reason why we get worked up is because it seems to be out of our control. I would also add my mantra these last couple of years is I want the thoughts in my head to be there because I put them there, right? And that's what I meant by having to redo my education the last few years. I basically just assumed that the nice people at NPR were telling me the truth. I assumed that, sure, you can't trust the legacy media completely, but certainly they're trying to tell us the truth. There's some voices get, I was a little too trusting. I was naive. Now I don't trust a single lick of any of it. And even if there's some truth does pop through, I'm gonna do my own research. I'm gonna find out for myself. I think we live in a time now where you've got to find out for yourself. You can't outsource information. I would love, 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 love. I tell this to my wife all the time. I would love to be wrong about any manner of things that I'm thinking about and researching. In fact, I would have a huge party if I was wrong about germ theory or cosmology or geoengineering and vaccines, whatever controversial topic of the day. I would love to be wrong, but I'm not gonna sit back and rest until I've done the due diligence and find out for myself.
Beautifully said. Yeah, as I had a conversation with James Corbett, who you may know,
Yeah, big fan.
Times of Western Japan. Yeah, the James Corbett report, and he and I were talking about fifth generation warfare.
Yes.
There is a war on, gentlemen, as you both well know, and nature will win, and Team Human will win. But it's a dogfight, as we all
Mm.
know. And so the service that you are performing at Terrain Theory in this community that you are growing is so vital right now. And we at OGA are happy to be a part of that. I know we're almost at time. I'm curious what you see for Terrain Theory this coming year in 2025 at OGA. Our podcast series is our new project, and we're so delighted to have you both on as our guests. And we'll continue to do the work at Substack and on the socials, and spreading our particular OGA work as widely as we can. What's up for Terrain Theory?
Well, Mike, I'll let you speak to the in-person event. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think before I turn that over to Mike, want to I want the listener to understand that Mike and I are so new to this space, to this terrain conversation. I mean, we're talking a handful of years, and I I have to give a shout out to everyone who's been a part of this conversation well before, and there are folks out there who have been ringing this bell, who have been digging into germ theory. And you already mentioned Dr. Tom Cowan, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, Alex Zeck, Dr. William Trebing, who had Goodbye Germ Theory, a book that's been out for a while. I mean, a lot of these folks we point our fingers at on our site, terraintheory.net, just under the resource section. We list some of the books, and I would encourage the listener who is even halfway curious to learn about terrain, or why I would say no virus, to go to the resources page, look at some of the books there, order some of the books, check out some of the film and video. Mike mentioned Mark and Sam Bailey, who've done extraordinary work exposing the pseudoscience of virology. There's too many to name here. Mike and I are just two small players in what has become a real big movement, and a real big family, the Terrain family. And yeah, I'm happy to just do our part, to continue to have an open mind, and also really important to shine the light on all those other folks who are also doing the work, who've been here far, far longer. Um, yeah, that's it. That's all I want to say. But as far as the year ahead, Mike, what do we got going on?
Yeah, well, one book that I would recommend as a good 101 level book is Mark Gober's An End to Upside Down Medicine. Mark has a real succinct way of laying out a lot of the arguments that we've been talking about this last hour. But in terms of moving ahead, Ben and I really want to do an in-person event. It's proving to be a little bit more challenging than maybe we anticipated. For those who don't know, I'm a touring musician. My band is called The Mammals. Been on the road for 25 years. And my wife and I do an event called the Hoot, the Summer Hoot. Dr. Rob, you've been there doing breath work the last 2 years. Ben, you've been there many years in a row. We've done some terrain-based programming there. We did a panel discussion called Healers and Growers a few years back. So I'm no stranger to event production, but an awful lot of work does go into it. and we haven't quite cracked the code on how to best present a terrain theory festival. Um, Part of it is having an appropriate site, which we've run into some roadblocks with, but it's definitely still top of mind for me and Ben. Finding a way, I mean, the podcast space is incredible. Like we said, OGA starting a podcast, it's a podcast world. That's how information is disseminated in this day and age. The podcast for us was life changing in terms of not only my education, but building this community. But when push comes to shove, getting together in person cannot be beat. That's where lifelong friendships are really cemented. That's where you're sharing a coherent field with like-minded people. That's where maybe you're stepping away from the workaday grind and treating yourself to a getaway. There's just so many facets to an in-person retreat that can't be replicated in the digital realm, to say the obvious. So it's something we're trying to figure out. We've had a couple false starts, but like I said, since I have some history in event production in the music world, I know it's a problem we're going to solve. So just, keep your eye on the terrain theory space, and we'll certainly keep you abreast of whatever we figure out and when.
Can I throw down an idea?
Yes, please.
I imagine a terrain theory mobile pop-up
Mm.
that shows up at events and festivals and holds forth um, on the great terrain theory conversations of our moment. And
I
I
like
think
that.
we were joking about like, yeah, we could set up like an ice plunge and we could do interviews in the cold plunge. And but a 10 by 10 tent, I'll throw down $100 to help us buy a tent and set it up. And I'd love to see you guys at festivals. I
That's
think
a great idea, Rob, because we don't have to build the entire edifice ourselves. We can just piggyback on what's already happening and get and have a presence in person. I think that's a great. Thank you, Rob. Where would we be without you?
well, and as a musician, Michael, and as a media guru, Benjamin, you both are so well equipped to pull that off. And I can't imagine but that people wouldn't love to show up and roast some yak sausage and sit around the campfire and drink craft beer and play music and enjoy what Ivan Illich so beautifully called conviviality. Um,
Hmm.
at these, and there's so many good festivals emerging, as you both know better than me,
Yeah.
right now. So maybe now's the time. Anyway, well, Happy New Year, gentlemen.
Happy New Year, Dr. Rob.
It's been a pleasure always to be in conversation with you. And again, it's terraintheory.net. Terraintheory.net. We
Yeah. And I'll say, Dr. Rob, I think one of the one of the greatest gifts of this podcast is having you introduced to our lives. Becoming friends with you, seeing you at the Hoot, having you on numerous times. There goes my son Grayson, who you've met. You are a gift to our lives. Everything that you've brought to us, to the podcast, to the audience, is immeasurable. So thank you for all the work that you're doing and for continuing to be a voice and a presence in our lives.
Thanks, Benjamin. Thanks, Michael. And right back at you. And let's make 2025 the most epic Team Human year yet.
Here, here.
Here, here.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk soon.